Hey, I'm Jeffrey Masters, and this is LGBTQ&A with Dr. Charles Silverstein, a man who helped to achieve one of our community's most significant victories. Back in 1973, he made the presentation before the American Psychiatric Association that led to the removal of homosexuality from the official list of mental illnesses. And for how much has changed for our community since then, I think it's easy to forget what a crucial game changer it was for the movement to have it officially declared that the way we live and love is not a mental illness. It's not something that needs or even can be quote-unquote cured. Charles is, of course, also known for co-writing the 1977 landmark book, The Joy of Gay Sex. That's a book that, along with being banned and burned and seized by custom agents around the world, it really did educate generations of gay men about all aspects of gay life, sexual and not. Now, our show is on a break right now. We will be back in a few months, but I wanted to reshare this interview with Charles that we did to help to honor and remember his life. He died last week at the age of 87, and this is one of the last interviews that he did. So without further ado, this is LGBTQ&A with Dr. Charles Silverstein. I want to start off by talking about your role in helping to declassify homosexuality as a mental disorder. But before we get to that, can you talk about why originally it was classified as that and any evidence or assumed facts that back that up?
Well, everything about sexuality is based upon the moral beliefs of a society. And since homosexuality had been condemned as immoral, it just automatically was assumed that it should go into the diagnostic and statistical manual as a mental disorder. Everything that wasn't basically a heterosexual missionary position motivated by reproduction was considered abnormal. And homosexuality, since you invariably you waste your seed, was considered ipso facto a disorder.
And so for you, when you were getting your PhD and, being taught this, did you initially believe that?
I was very confused then. When I was getting my PhD, I was in the closet because I certainly was not going to let anyone in the program know that I was gay because that would get me thrown out. There was a period before I got to college where I wanted to change, and I went into therapy for the purpose of changing. Obviously, it didn't work, and it never works, but it was what most people did in those days.
I mean, now we refer to that as conversion therapy, but back then it was just considered therapy, right?
Yes.
If you were homosexual and in therapy, the only purpose was to be quote-unquote cured.
Yes, to change you into someone who was, quote, normal, meaning heterosexual. And that was my goal. All I accomplished is I had the opportunity of going to bed with some nice women who thought I was an appropriate match, but I wasn't.
And eventually you did, make this presentation before the American Psychiatric Association.
Yes.
Was there a debate about who would make the presentation, or was it assumed that this was kind of your field and you would do it?
Since I was a psychologist, or at least working on my PhD in psychology, and it was decided that I should make the professional presentation, meaning the presentation of all the research and clinical work that suggested that homosexuality was not a mental disorder. And then Jean O'Leary, who had been a nun, but was no longer a nun, she left the church, she would make the presentation from the point of view of ordinary people about discrimination in the city of New York. So it was a very well-organized presentation. We knew what everybody was going to do.
And because this was identified as a goal of the movement, it wasn't just like you guys thinking this would be good, like on your own.
No, well, it had been started years before. Frank Kameny gets some of the credit for that. There are a number of psychiatrists who also were pushing to have homosexuality eliminated. Like every social movement, you always stand on the shoulders of the people who came before. Frank Kameny was not a part of this. Frank was a difficult person to get along with. Everyone who knew him will tell you that. He was a fierce fighter, but he could not have worked with us, and we wouldn't have had him helping us.
I think with like people like Frank Kameny, like Jim Obergefell, Amy Stevens most recently, we connect historic events with people. Were you then connected with this? Like, was it your name? I guess what I'm asking is like, did you feel like a celebrity in the gay community?
In some places, my name is connected with it. But I really do like to say these changes that occurred, not because of any one person at any one time, but it's really the sum total of a number of people who fought, sometimes against the enemy, sometimes with each other, because we had lots of that. There is no one person that can claim responsibility for these changes. We worked together. I was chosen to make this presentation because I knew the research, I knew the data, and I could present it well.
And so during this time, you were a member of the Gay Activist Alliance, the GAA, which was created in the wake of Stonewall.
Right.
I think it's an early gay organization that is important and yet not as well known. I just wonder if you can describe the group and what their goals were.
They were a radical organization. Let me contrast it with Frank Kameny. When Frank had demonstrations, everybody had to be a good boy and good girl. There was a dress code. Men had to wear suits, women dresses, shoes had to be shined. GAA was quite different. We weren't good boys, we were bad boys. And we wanted to be bad boys. And therefore we were out there, not dressed nicely, but dressed in ordinary clothes to make as much trouble as possible. What Frank and his group wanted to do was knock on the door of society and say, let us in. Oh, please let us in. What the radical movement in the early 70s did was not to say that we want to knock on the door. We wanted to fucking break it down and march through and tell society, we're changing you, you're going to change, and you better live with it. It was a much more aggressive, but not violent. Aggressive, but not violent. And so what we did, we had these, what were called zaps. And the zap was a demonstration where we would go to an organization and we'd break it up. And we found that professional organizations are the biggest sissies around. They called us sissies, but they were the real sissies. They didn't know how to deal with us. They would be having a meeting and some of our members would get up and say, we're taking over. And they would step to the side because they didn't know what to do. And that's why we kept winning everywhere we went.
You say that the members of the GAA were the strangest group of people you'd ever met. Why is that?
That was at the firehouse. You see, our center was the firehouse on Worcester Street. Because it was a place that we thought of as a place of liberation, then anyone could come in. You had to walk through the door. You didn't need a membership card. You didn't have to pay any dues. People who were oppressed could feel self-identified and walk in. Therefore, we had some lunatics that used to walk in through the door. And that's what I was talking about. We had some very strange people that came in. And they were all, no one was ever thrown out.
This was the firehouse that was 4 floors in Soho,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Who owned that building or paid the rent?
I don't know who owned the building. It was called the firehouse because it was a firehouse. A real honest to goodness firehouse, but no longer held the engines. It's not like there was a lot of fancy furniture. The furniture were the rejects from the street. I don't know who laid out the money to get the place. It was then paid for through dues, not dues, but through our Saturday night dances, where people paid $2 to come to the dance and all the soda or beer that you want for the night. And through that, they paid the rent.
Because the group, was an activist organization, but it also had this social component.
Yes.
4 dances, 4 events.
Yes, it has a big social component, and that was really very important. At the dances, there would be 1,000 guys there dancing.
In the firehouse?
Yeah.
Wow.
Easy 1,000. The meetings, the general meetings, were like Bedlam, would have 200 or 300 people there. And it was mostly a young crowd, but there were older people who were watching us and appreciative that we were there. But since they were older, they had more secure jobs that they had to worry about.
When you say younger, are you saying like teenagers or like 20s and 30s?
No. Late teens, 20s, early 30s.
Oh, and so to your point, the older people had established jobs and it couldn't be found out that they were gay.
Right, that had to be afraid of. And so, for instance, sometimes photographers would come in to take pictures of us, and it would be announced that photographer is going to be wherever. If you don't want your picture taken, come and stand on the other side.
So it's a really big emphasis on discretion.
Right. One of the primary problems about being gay in those days was a sense of loneliness and isolation. You could go to the baths and have sex with a guy and not know his name. You could go over to Central Park here and go to the bridle path and give or get a blowjob. Or you could go downtown to the trucks and do the same thing. But there wasn't a sense of affiliation between people. What GAA did was allowed gay men primarily to get to know each other in a setting other than just sex. You got to know each other as people. You got to know each other's names. You might visit each other during the week. Now, it may seem strange today, but in those days we didn't do that.
I've never heard anybody articulate it like that before. So like when I moved to New York City a couple of years ago, I was like, okay, where are my gay friends? And you're saying that during those days in the early 70s, that there was no conception of that. It was just kind of like one-off experiences, not a community of people.
It was like Boys in the Band, that group of self-hating gay men who were very jealous of each other and who were very sad. With GAA, and there were similar organizations in other cities as well. You got to know people as people. You laughed together. You went on zaps together, cursing the police or the city council or whoever you wanted to curse. And you had that sense of camaraderie.
Wow.
One day, at the end of a dance, we had a demonstration. We walked from the firehouse over to the building of a councilman who was holding up a civil rights bill. There's 1,000 guys walking up the street and over to his building to shout as loud as we can at 2 o'clock in the morning and wake everybody up. That was our goal. In fact, he wasn't in his apartment. We knew he wasn't. Didn't make any difference. The point was to have this demonstration, have the police show up, have the reporters and cameramen show up, and make a big simus out of it.
Wait, what?
Big simus. A big deal. I thought you said you're Jewish.
No, I am. I was clarifying what you said.
We were like an organism in the street, marching up with a sense of camaraderie and friendship with each other. That sort of thing was different than what had come before.
That kind of reminds me of something you wrote about in your book, For the Ferryman, about how during the earliest Pride marches, you would walk up to people and you greeted them by saying, "Happy birthday." You said it was as if you'd all been reborn and this was now your birthday. And I just had never heard that detail before.
Oh, yeah, we all did that. We did that every year. Not only that, but at the firehouse, at the Saturday night dances, there would be an officer at the door. And when a person would come in, the officer would be there to say welcome and shake his hand. But you see, things like that were very important. They were meant to fight the isolation we experienced in those days. I mean, for instance, when I walked through those doors the first time. And someone came over to me and shook my hand and said, "Welcome." I was shocked. The gay person in those days wanted to hide. Here, coming over and talking to me.
And then in June, you would say happy birthday to greet each other.
Yes, we would shake each other's hands and say happy birthday. That changed when it became a parade. When it changed from a march to a parade, the whole ideology changed. We would walk up Fifth Avenue to Central Park. And in Central Park, we had what was called a gay-in, lying down on the grass, and people would be making out. There were some speeches that were being made that no one listened to. But then when it changed so that it began on Central Park West and marched downtown, and there was the sale of beer and all the rest of that, the whole temper changed.
Hearing you say all this, it makes sense to me that when you went on to then co-author The Joy of Gay Sex with Edmund White, it makes sense that that book, yes, is about sex, but it's also about community, how to find and build queer community in a non-sexual aspect. It's there, on every page.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when Ed and I first sat down to talk about the book, and we made a list of the entries, it was quite clear that a majority of the entries were not about sex. It was about community. And it was about relating to each other. While most people, think of all the dirty pictures, what we always thought our greatest contribution is trying to write something that we would have wanted when we were kids. And that would be something more than just sex. That would be about community.
I was so surprised by the use of the word fucking as a verb. Can you talk about the decision to use that word instead of any euphemisms or just anything else?
As a matter of fact, the publisher of Crown's name went on it here. He called me in. He said, "Why do you have to use the word cock?" He didn't say fuck. He said cock. As if I didn't know what he meant. I asked him, "What word would you want me to use?" And he said, "Well, can't you use penis?" And I said to him, "Your cock is different than your penis." He said, "What's the difference?" He said, "Well, your penis is a part of your anatomy, and your cock is what you fuck your wife with." Cock stayed in. Interesting enough, fuck was not objected to, but the word shit was. See, there were sets of lawyers on both sides of the Atlantic reading all the things we had written. And so we had lawyers there and here, and anyone could raise an objection, and often did.
Was that the case in the later revised editions as well?
In the later editions, there were no problems of censorship at all.
And in those later editions, you added in sections about safe sex and HIV. This was the 90s. But for you, there was no book like this. Where did you learn all this when you were coming of age?
I would say I learned it on the job.
So trial and error.
Yeah, with lots of errors. In those days, there simply wasn't much around. You just had to learn. I remember the first time I had sex with a guy, and it was a big learning experience. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Fortunately, he did.
Well, you also label that first sexual experience as the, catalyst for your entire life of work.
Yes.
You decided at that moment to fight for acceptance. What was it about having sex for the first time that made that spark?
Because he was such a nice guy. See, I had come to this with a sense of shame that I was bad. That's why I went into psychoanalysis for years. And here I met someone who was completely different, who seemed to like me and who certainly liked his life. And I'd never met someone like that before because I never allowed myself to. And that changed things. There was this enormous amount of pent-up energy. And the guy is waiting to just explode. So exciting.
Today, open relationships and non-monogamy seems to be more prevalent than ever. Is that true, or are more people simply just talking about it more than ever before?
Well, it's an interesting question you ask. We certainly have more relationships that are considered to be open relationships. We have more polyandry. In days gone by, you had less of them openly, but whether they existed anyway is an interesting question, and I don't think any of us have the answer. In other words, today, what they certainly are more honest, whereas back in my day, 100 years ago, people would lie. Now, to what extent these relationships survive, I don't know.
So while I'm asking questions that maybe don't have an answer, I have one more,
Go ahead.
which is that in your book, Man to Man, you have a chapter called Fathers, Sons, and Lovers
Yes.
about the father's importance in one's sexual development. Is it wrong for me to connect that to the prevalence of the word daddy now in today's culture?
There is a whole daddy scene in gay culture. I'm not sure how large it is, but there's certainly a daddy scene and always has been.
So this is not new.
It is not new. There was even such a magazine called Daddy Magazine. I have a couple of old copies here somewhere.
Now that you're 86 years old, how has your own relationship to sex changed?
Well, when you get to be 86, you don't have a lot of sex, which is all right. I mean, there is something about testosterone levels going down. That's not the only thing that goes down. Gravity will take its will on you. I'm still sexually interested, but I have less opportunity. And of course, to tell you the truth, I don't really want to date anyone. I don't want to go through that. Been there, done that.
Regarding dating, in your memoir, you write about, your great love of over 20 years, William.
Yes.
I only bring him up now because the name on the screen for your computer says William on the Zoom.
Oh, I see. It's a password.
Oh, that's your password.
That's a
Okay.
password.
Sorry,
That's a password.
Oh, a password.
I have 12,000 passwords.
Oh, gotcha.
My passwords have passwords. I can't keep up with them. But if you're asking me, do I think about him, I would say every day. I don't stop loving him because he's dead.
Yeah.
Just miss him.
And so losing him, is that why you say you have no interest in going through that again?
No, it's because of how much work is involved. I have close relationships, and I'd love to have a close relationship with another person, sure. But I wouldn't want to go through all the drama that one goes through to have a lover, husband, whatever.
I mean, last question about your sex life, but sex was such a big part of your life and your adulthood for so long. Now that you do have it less frequently, do you feel like a part of you is missing, or is it just that's like what happens and that's life?
Both of them, actually. I miss some of that. But also, there's a lot of disappointment that goes along with it, and it's a lot of pain. I can do without that. I found that the more in love two people are, the more easily it is for them to hurt each other. So if I have any kind of other relationship, I don't want it to be that hurtful. Now, I have a number of very good friends, very close friends, and we take care of each other. I know that if I need something, I know all the people I can call on, and they know they can call on me. Would I like something more? Yeah, but what I would like is not what you expect.
What is that?
What I would have liked is when I was younger, would have been the opportunity of having children. Something that some gays are possible today. But I would have liked to have kids. I've worked a lot of my life with kids. Read summer camps in the Boy Scouts. I like kids. That's what I regret more than anything else. You didn't expect that one, did you?
I feel like it's like I have like it's like a simple question, but like what was stopping you from having kids?
It was legally impossible in those days.
Oh.
You didn't know that? You give a child to fags? That didn't happen in those days.
So it was not even a discussion.
It was not even a discussion. Today, gay people can adopt children. Sometimes you make arrangements, have a female friend making love to a turkey baster, that sort of thing. But in those days, it really was unthinkable. Sex was still against the law. The sodomy prohibition didn't come down to, I remember, it was the Virginia case that finally went to the Supreme Court. But before then, it was against the law. Having sex was against the law. They were very restrictive years. Now, I'm glad that younger generations are more free. That's what we were fighting for.
And that was Dr. Charles Silverstein, recorded in 2021. He died last week at the age of 87. Now, as I mentioned, I'm also currently doing interviews for our new season, so if you have any suggestions or places to point me, maybe any great elder stories you think need to be told, I would love to hear that. So come find me on social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at JeffMasters1, and there's also a contact form on our website. That's lgbtqpodcast.com. All right, I'll see you next time. Bye.